All right, I think we're going to start. So obviously we've got some Pesach material here, so this isn't we're interrupting our normal Talmud class for some. Although I was thinking, if you take Talmud, the Haggadah makes a lot more sense to you, because the first parts, especially of the Haggadah, are taken from the Talmud, and you start to understand the reasoning and the going back and forth and the kind of creative interpretation of verses. So, in fact, the first several pages of the Talmud of the Haggadah is just a Talmud class. So the style becomes more familiar. Anyway, I'm going to go through one particular theme, and maybe we'll have time for a few more. But I want to start with a passage that's both intrigued me and bored me for many years. I mean, bored me because it's so uninteresting that it's interesting. in the sense, like, well, why is it here? Yeah, so why is it here? Because it tells you almost nothing. So it's and it's hard, you can't see the page number, so you have to turn the page. So I have the 4 questions. I'll get back to those. Then you flip the page, and unfortunately, the English didn't come out in the copy as well as I would have liked. But we are told that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Elazar, so do you see what that is?
Yeah.
In B'nai Brak.
It's on the left-hand side.
It's on the left-hand side, yeah. And the editor of our Silverman Haggadah has a little note on top, the following incident. So that's what I'm looking at right now. All right, so Maseh, I'm going to read it quickly. Maseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. So these rabbis, Hayu Mesubin b'Bnei Brak. They gathered in B'nai Brak, but they were Mesubin, meaning they were leaning, or they were celebrating Passover in B'nai Brak. By the way, I'm not going to focus on this right now. It's entirely possible that this incident didn't take place on Pesach at all. Mesubin could also, if you look at the context, it doesn't seem like it did, but I'm not going to go through that right now. And Mesubin doesn't only mean lean. It can mean that they gathered together, they were partying. All right, but that's not, all right, anyhow. And they were telling the story of the Exodus all night long. Until their students came. Rabotenu, my teachers, our masters, it's time for the Shema. Okay. So what this story tells us is the rabbis gathered together and they were telling the story of the Exodus all night long. Right? I mean, that's pretty much what it tells us. So there's a lot of just questions about so what here. I mean, you read it at the Seder, we already know. I mean, we're at the Seder. So you've got us there already. So we know you're supposed to tell the story of the Exodus. Now, it does give an example of a good way of celebrating the Seder, which is you're supposed to stay up all night long. Well, right, tell the story. So anyhow, rabbis were doing it, so we have to do it too. Okay, so, but the broader question here is that, so this is the Magid section. The Magid section is the section of the Seder where you tell the story. So you flip to the Magid section, and you've got to keep on flipping and flipping and flipping before you get anywhere near the story. And in fact, the first several paragraphs of the Magid section are not the story of the Exodus itself, like slavery in Egypt or the Red Sea, but actually stories about rabbis telling stories. Why not just get right to the story?
Right.
So I mean, here you have, okay, maybe this is an example. You should stay all night. But I mean, it's such a boring little story. They stayed up all night telling stories. So why is it there? So I have a particular theory that actually takes us through most of the Magid section. I won't get through the whole thing. And I actually think there's something very deep that's hidden. It's not even hidden very well. I mean, it's subtle, but it's clear. There's a theme here that goes all through the beginning sections of the Magid, and the theme is challenges to authority in general, and it turns into a kind of political philosophy lesson that the Haggadah chooses to begin the storytelling about freedom and how they identify freedom, how you build free society. Okay, so you'll have to bear with me. So now go back to the beginning. Let's flip back to the beginning, because you actually start the Magid section. Remember, Magid means storytelling. You start the storytelling section with the 4 questions. That's the very first thing. So now, the thing about the 4 questions is since every grandchild, young kid, has to memorize them, and it's become such a big part of our Jewish culture, literally for centuries. I think we just take it for granted. It just seems like an opportunity, like a kid's play. Okay, the little kids are now going to tell the questions, but you have to take a step back and think, why are we starting with questions? And then just the effrontery of how you begin our most important ritual with a bunch of questions. And a question you could ask is that, who says that you have the right to ask? Why do you feel like you're allowed to challenge? Now, the Hebrew actually here is not questions. I think I've gone through that with this group before. It's the arba, if you're old enough. What do you call them? The kashas. Kashas, which is kushiot in Hebrew, which means actually difficulties. It's not kasha, which, by the way, you're still not allowed to eat, even with the new conservative ruling. So it's not the four kashas. It's not kasha. It's kushiot, which means challenges. It really means, so you start the Magid section with challenges, with questions. So right away, you are telling your children, what I need for you to do every year is challenge me. Right. I'm not going to get away with just telling you what to do. We eat matzah because I said so. We lean because I said so. Every year, I'm requiring you to challenge me, to ask me questions. And since, by the way, since next year we ask the same questions, every year I have to come up with different answers. Right? I mean, I'm going to assume you forgot. I mean, so every year there's new answers because it's still a continuing process of challenge. And I'll go a little deeper here. So right away you start with challenge to authority. I'm not going to accept this on your say-so. Right. The children are asking questions that you have to explain. So here's a dramatic example of this, and then I'll move on. But one of the most moving episodes in Primo Levi's first book. So Primo Levi wrote this book, Survival in Auschwitz, If This Be a Man in Italian. And it's his memoir of being in Auschwitz for about a year. He was only in for a year because he came in, rather late in the wars. One of the reasons he was able to survive. So there was a kind of orientation, in Auschwitz where you learn the rules. So the orientation to hell. And he spoke German. They didn't provide translators. Either you understood the German or you didn't. But he could understand German. So there was something. And of course, they're all nonsense rules designed to kill you. But so he asked why for one of the rules. And the guard just beat him up with his rifle and said, "Here there is no why." And you really look at that passage and you think, okay, that's the definition of slavery. The definition of slavery, of dehumanizing slavery, is that you're never allowed to ask why. So if the definition of slavery is you don't ask why, the definition of freedom is you can always ask why. You can always challenge. Okay, so that's the four questions. All right, now you turn the page. After the four questions, you have a bit of the story, a kind of a taste of the story, in the Avadim Hayinu. So Avadim Hayinu is at the bottom there, on the right. All right, but I'm not going to focus on the Avadim Hayinu part. If we have time, I'll go back to it. Avadim Hayinu meaning you were slaves. I'm going to focus on something that actually, part of this got cut off in your copy, but probably you're familiar with it, and most of it didn't get cut off. It's about 2/3 of the way through the paragraph. Therefore, even if all of us were endowed, do you see that? With wisdom and understanding. Excellent translation, by the way, in the Silverman Agata. I want to point that out. So it's true. It's true. It's what you want from a translation. It's a literal translation. It's well done. Anyway, and this is afilu anachnu chachamim. Let me just get it. I'm going to get the Hebrew exactly. So afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nevonim, kulanu zkenim. Even if we were wise and learned and smart, the best rabbis in the world, the wisest Jewish scholars in the world, mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yitziat Mitzrayim. It would still be the mitzvah to tell about the exodus from Egypt. V'chol ha'marbeh l'saper b'yitziat Mitzrayim harei meshubach, and to dwell at length on the story of this liberation is indeed praiseworthy. That part didn't come out in English, but what I want to focus on is even the smartest, even the greatest, even the most highly qualified rabbi still has to do the work of telling the story and studying. That's also a challenge to authority. That's right. It means we don't accept your authority just because you've got the title. Just because the title doesn't mean anything to me. Just because last year you were good at it and you told a good story. Just because last week you were good at it, it doesn't. You never rest on your laurels as an authority figure. You always have to continue to prove yourself. It's like a doctor. has to have to continue to take those exams to get recertified. We expect continual recertification from you. So it's another challenge. You don't just get the title Grand Rabbi, Pope, therefore we do whatever you say. It's an extra mitzvah for you to continue to learn, to continue to grow, because there's going to be continuing challenges to you. Yeah.
So in a sense, therefore, there's never a final answer. There's always an opportunity for greater insight.
That's right. Well, that's for sure. Here I'm saying there's also a subtle, maybe not so subtle, there's a kind of dig at authority here. It's kind of a disrespect. Just because you learned it last year doesn't mean you're going to learn. Doesn't mean I'm going to learn from you anything this year. So it's again a challenge to authority, especially in context. Now we got the very next one, which I started with. Okay, so this is the 4 rabbis, in Bnei Brak, and they stayed up all night. Right. What I'm going to focus on right now, what's key right now, is that what happens at the end. Who comes and rebukes them? In fact, the students. The students rebuke them. They tell them off. They remind them. So that's interesting already. In the context of this one challenge to authority after another, we've got the students that come, hey, rabbis, enough. Right? Enough. We need you now to help lead us in the Shemata. So they rebuke, they challenge, they correct. And what we have is that they're obviously comfortable doing that. Right? We don't have a sequel that says the rabbis say, how dare you interrupt us? How dare you interrupt us? We have 4 holy rabbis here. We're studying in a different culture. You can imagine that. In a different culture, they wouldn't dare. So obviously they're part of a culture that encourages it. But we've already had 2 passages that show us that we're a part of that culture. Okay? The next one. So we've got another one. It means they're all in a row. Okay? Rabbi Elazar, son of Azariah, says, I'm nearly 70 years old, yet I can never understand. So first of all, you got this, he's 70, so you might think, okay, give him a break, he's done. Why should he have to learn more? He's 70 years old, he's got white hair. It's telling us, I don't care if you're 70, there's still more for you to learn, but then it's deeper. So I didn't learn that you should say the Exodus at night until Ben Zoma explained it to me. So who's Ben Zoma? So you know a little bit from the Talmud. You know that Ben Zoma is his student. Yeah. So again, the student is teaching the rabbi. Again, a challenge to authority. I can teach you something. Okay? But here's something deeper that I never noticed until, I've read this 1,000 times. Not quite 1,000 times. It's interesting. Ben Zoma is actually not a rabbi. Why do we call him Ben Zoma and not Rabbi Ben Zoma or Rav Ben Zoma? He's one of the few Talmudic authorities who's actually not a rabbi, which actually underlines the theme again that even if you're not a rabbi, you correct the rabbi. So it's not just that he's a student that never became a rabbi. And yet, we listen to him. He knows more than the teacher, right? So, all right. But one more point, just in this little paragraph here, is that, and some of you may have to remember from last year, and a little bit high holiday, as I mentioned this. So this story here, this is also a weird thing. What is this doing here? I mean, that's a very strange thing about this passage. What's it doing here? It's teaching us that we tell the story at night. Well, of course we tell the story at night. We're gathered around the Seder table at night. We didn't know that we tell it at night. He never knew that. So he's actually not talking about the Seder here. He's talking about the Shema. Remember, the Shema has, in the tzitzit section, a little bit about the Exodus from Egypt. So he's saying that we do say that at night, even though we don't wear the tzitzit at night. But what I want to tell you is that this little paragraph is part of a larger story. And the larger story is the rebellion against Rabban Gamliel. So Rabban Gamliel was the head of the academy, the chief rabbi, and he was rude to Rabbi Joshua. Because he was rude to Rabbi Joshua, his colleagues and students rebelled against him, and they made Elazar ben Azariah the head of the academy for a little while. So this story itself constitutes a challenge to authority, because Ben Zoma, the student, teaches Elazar, but it's part of a longer story, which is one of the most dramatic examples in the Talmud of a challenge to authority, where they actually overthrow Rabban Gamliel. And in overthrowing Rabban Gamliel, they make a decision to open up their lectures to the entire public, which means that they open their lectures are the legislative process, because it's rabbis getting together and deciding, okay, you guys can eat kitniot on Pesach, or you can't eat kitniot on Pesach. It's during these legislative sessions that law gets made, and Rabban Gamliel decided to close those off to the public, and Rabbi Elazar decided to open them. So it's yet another paragraph where one of the clear sub-themes, or maybe the principal theme, is a challenge to authority. Okay, turn the page. I mean, it keeps going. Then you've got the 4 children. Okay, the 4 sons in this. So the 4 sons is actually probably the proper translation. So I like to call it the 4 children. Okay, so I want to say also, of course, what distinguishes each of the children is the different kind of question that they ask. So we're back to questions. We're back to children asking questions. Children asking questions, which I think in our culture, our Jewish culture, we take for granted. So we don't analyze it. But there's lots of cultures where children aren't allowed to ask questions. It's discouraged. You do it because we said so. It's a tradition, and that's why you do it. That's not the case in the Pesach. That's not what the Seder starts with 4 questions, and it comes into an example and says there's 4 children, they're asking questions. If you have a child that doesn't know how to ask, what's your responsibility as a parent? To teach him how to ask. At pitachlo, that's what it says for the one that doesn't know how to ask, means that you encourage him to ask questions. Him or her to ask questions. The irony there is that what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to be challenged. Please, you're saying to the kid, I need to be challenged. I can't have you just sit there and do it. I need you to look at it, understand it enough that you can start to challenge me. That's your job as a parent. All right. Now, what you have here, I think, in something subtle in the 4 children, is that you start to understand maybe there's a limit to the challenges to authority, and that's in the wicked son. So the wicked son says, "Ma havodah zot lachem." What is this work? This service to you? Lachem v'lo lo. To you and not to him. So the limit to questioning authority is you have to see yourself in the story. So if you see yourself in the story, if you identify yourself as part of us, then we can accept any challenge. Any challenge is on the table. You go ahead and you challenge us. As soon as you remove yourself from the people, I'm not part of you. What are you guys doing? As soon as you remove yourself, then you actually don't have to listen to the challenge. I'm not interested in your challenge if you're not part of us. Any challenge is okay once you identify yourself as part of us. By the way, this is a pretty radical statement, but it's the idea. Any challenge is authentic if you're doing it as part of the people. If you're not doing it as part of the people, then honestly, I'm too busy for you, because I've got all sorts of people that are identifying as part of the people, and they've got questions of their own. So what makes the Rasha wicked is not the question itself; it's how he asks it. I'm asking it as an outsider. I was born inside, but I'm placing myself outside, and in placing myself outside, then as a parent, as a teacher, as an authority figure, I don't have to engage as deeply. But as soon as you say that you're inside, I engage totally. Okay. And these challenges to authority are consecutive in the Seder, right? Let's see, are there any more? Oh yeah, one more, and it's the next passage again. So if you flip the page, it says, in the beginning, before the days of Abraham, our forefathers were idol worshippers. Okay, mitchila ovdei avodah zarah you avotenu. Okay. This is a very interesting passage too. The origin of this passage is that God is implying here that there's 2 types of slavery. There's chattel, bondage, physical slavery. That's avadim hayinu, the Pharaoh b'Mitzrayim, we were slaves to Pharaoh. Then it's an important reminder, and it reflects a debate in the Talmud that there's another kind of slavery. It's spiritual slavery, and it's a little easier to get in the Hebrew. Bitchila in the beginning, ovdei avodah zarah. Now, the translation here is our forefathers were idol worshippers, but the literal Hebrew is that we were workers in foreign work. We were slaves in foreign slavery, which becomes the term for idol worship, which means that they were in a kind of spiritual slavery. Okay. The interesting thing about this idol worship, one of the key differences between the slavery to Pharaoh and the slavery they're talking about here, which is that they were idol worshippers, is the slavery to Pharaoh is totally involuntary. Pharaoh one day just gets up and decides to enslave us with the power of the state. The slavery of idol worship, it's not so much, it's voluntary. It's not imposed. There's no foreign power that's imposing it. It's simply an error. It's an error. We saw the world incorrectly. In the beginning, we saw the world incorrectly, and then Abraham came along, and now we see the world correctly. Now, from my context, right, what I've been trying to say, what this is really saying is that our ancestors, so our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, saw the world incorrectly. They thought there were all sorts of gods. They thought you could bow down to a tree. They had fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of the universe and the meaning of human existence. That's our ancestors. So if it happened to our ancestors, it could be happening to us too. It's introducing the possibility that our grandparents are doing it totally incorrectly. So why do you need all these questioning? Well, you have to have questioning and challenges built into the system to ensure that we don't fall into the same error as our ancestors. So implied is the reason our ancestors were so mistaken in their spiritual approaches is that nobody was challenging them. Nobody was asking questions until Abraham came. Now, of course, Abraham in the Midrash is the person that's challenging, that's digging, is asking questions. He's the wise child. He's continuing at. They were still the Jewish people. So Abraham asks, within the context of the Jewish people. But if Abraham doesn't challenge his father, some of you are familiar with that Midrash, if he doesn't challenge his father and say, why are you worshiping this thing, which means nothing, then there's no Jewish people. So this also tells us that challenges to authority are part and part of who we are. And I guess in a deeper way, we start the storytelling section of the Haggadah with all these challenges to authority, because what do we celebrate on Passover? Freedom. And so it's a little bit of a political science lesson, but it's different than reading Aristotle, right, or Plato, or modern political scientists. It's getting at the idea of what constitutes a free society with several little just stories, narratives, passages, questions, but the overall message is this is what it means to be free. This is what it means to be a free society, a free culture. It's not individual freedom here. Although individual freedom you could define as the ability to ask questions. But this to me is focusing on how do you set up little free communities. All right, so what are the implications of this? I think, again, because we just take it for granted and we grow up in this culture, which in America happens to be a free culture, we sometimes lose sight of how unique this is and a fundamental uniqueness of Jewish culture. Because other religions aren't necessarily like this, which encourage this kind of free-reigning challenges to authority and constant asking of questions. But look at Jewish societies. Look at every synagogue. Yeah. Right? Ask any rabbi if this rings true. Yeah, that the congregants feel free to bring challenges. That it's not a hierarchical structure, as much as you would like it to be. I would like it to be sometimes. That really it's a freewheeling ideas flowing back and forth in challenges. And I think we mistake sometimes the political system in Israel and assume that Israel became a democracy because of just imitating Western forms of government. And I think it has a lot more to do, well, I think it has something to do with this is part of Jewish culture from the very beginning. I mean, this is 2,000 years old, more than 2,000 years old. This idea of challenging authority. So it's when we start to set up a Jewish state, it's the only direction we can move in. And it's an interesting kind of democracy too, because it's a very harsh the rhetoric is always very harsh. The challenges back and forth. You go to the Knesset and it's just again, part of it is that we've taken forms of Western democracy. Part of it is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the fact that the student is always correcting the teacher. All right, I'm going to stop for a second and see if there's questions. Yeah.
I want to challenge your authority.
But you've already just. Yeah, so, but you've already proved the point. So we can.
How you respond will be through my.
Okay. Yeah.
I looked at this very differently. I don't think this is about challenging authority. I think it's about humility. I think when the rabbis accept the students' reminder that it's time for Shema, they're thankful. They say, "Oh, great, thank you for letting us know." When the rabbi learns from Ben Zoma, he's humble. He's willing to learn it. Yeah. When we're asking our students to challenge us, it's not to challenge authority, but we are humble that we don't know all, and we understand the questions help us improve. And in fact, in this context, the telling of the it's time, maybe it's not so much for our children, or equally as much for ourselves, so that we learn and we continue to grow. And I think if we're humble in the approach, this is the central message of Judaism.
All right, so two points. One is just I forgot to say it, so I'll say it in a second. But the first point is that I think it's really just the flip side. I mean, you can't have a culture that's open to these challenges unless you build in a sense of humility, right? I mean, if that was the issue with Rabban Gamliel, is that he was arrogant. He didn't have the humility to accept correction. So then they had to kind of force the issue. But there can't be challenges to authority unless there's a sense of humility. Yes, I can be corrected, and then maybe it's an added dimension in how you shape a free culture, which, first of all, you have to have the challenges to authority. I don't think there's any denying of these questions, and the continuing correcting of the elders does encourage a challenge to authority. So you have to have a certain mindset as an authority to be able to accept it, and then to have a free culture. So you have both you encourage, it's just encourage. It's in the system that the students challenge authority, and it's also in the students that the authority figures accept it with a sense of grace and humility. The first thing I forgot to say is, of course, the fact that Moses is not in the Haggadah at all. Right. I mean, so that there's all sorts of reasons for that. It is a fascinating element of the Haggadah. But part of it is that we take the number one authority figure out of the story at all. Because if there's any authority figure that we would bow down to and say, we accept your word unconditionally, it would be Moses. Yeah. So we can't have Moses in the story. Because we can't have a character that would have so much authority that his shining light would blind out any possible challenges to authority. And, of course, during Moses' career, people challenged him all the time, one after another.
It's even more significant because it says Joshua. Now, remember, this is not in the desert anymore. This is after they're in Israel, the land, okay? When they are free to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
So he's the one essentially taking and telling this specific thing. The parallel.
Where are you seeing Joshua? Do you see Joshua in the...
Yeah. And Joshua said unto all the people.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so, I know they have Joshua.
It has to be after they've gotten into the land.
Right.
The comparability to the diaspora is so impacting right here, because it parallels what all the Jewish people have been once they've left the land. How easy it is to be distracted or attracted to all these other pagan ways, etc. So that's what takes on an even greater significance.
Right. So, Aline.
Yeah, you were saying about our ancestors having these foreign gods and self-imposed slavery.
Right.
And going from what Mo said, but we are just as distracted, and we have so many other things, like, you could call these pagan gods, consumerism, materialism, and all those other things that make us think we don't have time for Torah.
Yeah.
Today.
Oh yeah, I think that the idea that there's a kind of spiritual enslavement, that are distractions and being in error. So what I was adding is that how do you know? You only know if you have a culture of critique, where there are people, and students in particular, are encouraged to challenge the mores of the culture, of the society. Now, it hints at limits, right? That's the wicked son. Don't come at as a smart aleck from the outside telling us Jews what to do. If you stay on the inside, then we can respect it. And I think, again, I think it's created a culture that it's so ingrained, we're barely aware of it. But I mean, we make jokes about it. It's 2 Jews and 3 opinions, and Jews on desert island have to make 3 synagogues, and one I don't go to. I mean, all these sort of funny jokes are part of the culture of we're constantly challenging each other. There's a limit to our respect, and other religions don't have that. We may not be aware of it if we don't grow up in other religions, but other religions don't necessarily have that.
I don't think that's not really, I mean, look at the Muslims. I mean, Christians also have been battling over whether it's the blood of God or the sin. I mean, there are those differences.
They are. So and it's a complicated story. So and I'll say this is too simple, but we only have another minute left. But if you don't have the culture of critique built in, when you have differences, you'll tend to resolve them violently, because that's why democracies are generally more peaceful than non-democracies, because in democracies they learn to settle their differences through argument and debate and voting, whereas in non-democracies they settle their differences violently because that's all they've got. So I think that's what you have in Islam, frankly, and certain eras of Christianity, you had it in Christianity where, since there wasn't anything built in to help them kind of resolve their differences or challenge or channel their differences into debate and study and argument, it blows up into violence, and you have very little of that in Judaism, and I think it's part of what's going on. I'll say one last thing, because we're out of time, and this is off the record, although I'm recording it, but I think it's interesting, and don't make it more of it than what I'm saying, because it doesn't identify me politically or have anything to do with who I'm going to vote for or not going to vote for. But I think the Bernie Sanders phenomena is really interesting. I mean, the fact that this is a guy who's culturally very Jewish. You can't listen to him for 5 seconds without saying that's a guy who grew up in a Jewish home. I mean, that's and a very Jewish home. And look, he may have strayed, and it doesn't seem to be fully his life right now. But the one candidate sort of left standing, although after last night it's hard to say. But so the one person that challenges the sort of national notions of what it means to be pro-Israel happens to be the Jewish candidate, and it's because only a Jew could. I mean, Bernie Sanders has to be Jewish. Only a Jew would be so comfortable challenging the very basic structure of his community, the communal structure of his community, and do it unapologetically, and continue to say, I'm Jewish. I'm proud to be Jewish. Now, you may not like, his strategy for living a Jewish life, where he doesn't have Jewish children, and it's probably not going to pass down generation to generation. But the fact that he's so comfortable questioning the authority of his own community, it comes very naturally to him, I think actually shows what it means to grow up in a deep Jewish culture, even if it's not a religious culture, because this identifies Jewish culture, I think, very clearly, until you read yourself out of it. Once you read yourself out of it, then you're in a different culture. Yeah.
I'm going to say that he wasn't saying that he was proud to be Jewish. In fact, in the beginning, he kept talking about his Polish background, always, until Jews started to really question him, are you